Hi everyone, Gary here. Just back to talk to you about something that I'm really impressed with, something that I think everyone should read, and Game Masters should all kind of have a look at. Another like fantastic module. So, actually, two things by the same author. These two books. This is the Gardens of Yin. Nice thin. It's printed on drive-through. It's a print on demand, and the Stygian Library. Both of them are of these brilliant adventures, amazing adventures are written by Emmy Allen. Honestly, these contain some of the best, most interesting mechanics that have transformed my game mastering in the last 2 years or so. So all I'm going to do is just muse about both of these and talk you through them and why they're interesting. And they kind of come as a set, like they're kind of doing the same thing, and how I think one of them kind of works slightly better than the other, but they are interesting. So, bona fides before we get going. Gardens of Yin. I have run it 3 times. I have run it twice for old school essentials with low level characters, maybe level 2, level 3 characters, a small party, and an enormous party of about 10 player characters of about level 5, level 6. It worked brilliantly both times. And then I've also run it for a Journeyman Expert Master, a other old school system that I wrote, and it worked really, really well for that. That was run also as a low level adventure, and there wasn't really that much difference in terms of the outcomes based on the system. So it was really, really the adventure. The Stygian Library, I have only run this once. It's the newer one, so I've had kind of like less time to get to grips with it. I've run this once. I have run it for Old School Essentials with one of the same groups that did it for that did the Gardens of Yin. So let's talk about why these books are so brilliant and you should go and buy them straight away, especially if you're interested in how mechanics inform gameplay. So let's just talk about the through line for both of these. The Gardens of Yin sees the characters enter a demi-plane of gardens, and it's very kind of Art Nouveau. It's kind of sort of Narnia through the looking glass, and basically they enter this realm and they find themselves in a kind of endless garden that's kind of vaguely Edwardian. It's really foggy; they can't see anything, and they're moving closer to the center of the garden to try and discover something. Now, in the center of the garden, there's some kind of mimetic horror. We'll talk about that in a minute. And as they explore, they begin to realize that actually they're not just in a kind of normal garden, they're in some kind of strange pocket universe, and there's something really weird going on. The Stygian Library is similar. They step through, not into a demi-plane of gardens, but they step out of wherever they are into a demi-plane of books, a demi-plane of libraries. And it's like endless corridors of libraries. It always makes me think of I don't know if you've ever watched a really old film, The Page Master. The beginning of that with the kind of like really claustrophobic use of shelves. That's what's going on here. And at the center of the garden here, there is not a monster like there is in the Gardens of Yin. There is a great computer called the Sherlock computer, which is basically kind of computing the fundamental question of reality. And they can go to it, and the reward that they get from it is based on a series of different things. So they're both really, really interesting in terms of their setup and their through line. They are sandbox adventures. They're exactly the sort of thing you can just drop into any setting. It doesn't matter if you wanted to take a break from something. I'd recommend them. They take probably 2 or 3 sessions to get to the end, of maybe slightly longer, depending on how long your sessions are, and depending on what system you're using. But 2 or 3 sessions of 4 hours is a good amount, kind of a lot for these. They are really, really, really good. So what makes these so good? A couple of different things. First of all, the depth crawl mechanic, which is wonderful. So we know about point crawls, we know about hex crawls, and Emmy Allen, she has come up with this brilliant mechanic called depth crawls. They might have turned up somewhere else, but I don't know if they turned up anywhere else. But this is the first time I saw them, so I give her the credit for that. Now, what happens is you have a series of tables. They go up to, I think they go up to 40. 4 locations. Let's have a look. So they go up to 35. Okay, so what happens is they step through and you roll on this table with a d20 and you add what depth they are into the gardens. So they start at depth 1, so you roll a d20 and you add 1. Or I should say they start at depth 0. So you roll a d20, you don't add anything. And then depending on what you get, that's what they first encounter when they first step through the portal. So we've got ponds, orchards, vine trellises, silk gardens, kennels, hedge mazes, chess lawns, all this kind of stuff that's really kind of, like Edwardian, slightly kind of strange. I always emphasize the fact that it's meant to be, I think it's meant to be really creepy. And what they're doing is, the way the depth control works is when they move to a new location, so they basically say, we want to head deeper into the garden, what you do is you roll on this and you add what depth they're at. So they start at depth 0. If they move deeper, they go to depth 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. So there's things on this table. That's why it goes up to 35, because even though they're rolling a d20, they're adding their depth. And right at the center of the garden is something called the Ruins of Yin. So this is called the Gardens of Ynn. And what it is revealed, I think, really organically, and one of the best ways I've ever seen it in a module, is that there was a race, the She, that She like Banshee, and they are, Alan describes them as kind of what to elves, what elves are to humans. They're these kind of like more, I don't know how to put it, kind of like more archetypal sense of kind of self. And they had created this garden, and they had created something, and something has gone terribly wrong. And this is, you are finding their civilization after the apocalypse. So it's a post-apocalyptic setting, the gardens. And as they head deeper into the gardens, reality starts to fragment. They realize that they're kind of all like on vast shifting islands of gardens. And when they make it to Yin, they get to the ruins. And there's a great mechanic for generating the actual like ruins of the city, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they've discovered this thing called the idea of thorns, which is basically, yeah, I said earlier, like a mimetic horror. And what the idea wants to do is, it has overrun Yin. So as they get closer, there's thorns everywhere. It wants to implant itself. It's a sentient idea. It wants to implant itself in people's minds. So one really brilliant thing. While this module is written for BX, it's written for like OSR systems, and there are statistics for the idea of thorns. Actually, the final confrontation with the idea of thorns becomes a puzzle, because you say to the players, well, your characters know about this idea now, and that's what it wants. It wants to embed itself in your mind. And in doing that, it's going to escape, because once you've started to think about it, you know about it, it affects your sense of self, and you're going to return to the normal world, and you're going to bring it with you, and then it's going to affect other people. And Alan gives us this massive description about what happens, like a timeline of the idea of thorns taking over a material world, and it's really, really, really compelling. And I remember, the first time I ran this, I had players that were a little bit higher level, and they had access to spells that could alter memory, and they were considering, like, how do I get out of this, and then get this memory out of my head. When you make it to Yin, so you've been using this depth crawl technique to kind of go D20, add the depth. You get to Yin, and you take a bunch of dice. I think it literally just says a bunch of dice. You throw them onto a sheet of paper, and the value on the dice and the dice type determine what kind of ruins are encountered. So you could very quickly kind of generate a huge city map, and they can explore it at a pace that you find comfortable with. This is the best example, and the Stygian Library works exactly the same. You're heading deeper, but I'll talk about that in a moment. This is the best example of procedural content on the table that I've ever seen. Especially the fact that it just uses dice. The only thing that comes close to this is when you play dungeon crawling board games that are maybe like cooperative, and you're drawing cards to determine what the next room should be. This doesn't use a card deck, yet it's still manufactured into the mechanic. And this is what makes it so elegant, is this idea of going deeper, and the fact that there are things that you won't definitely see, and there are also things that you can't possibly see when you first enter the gardens. So it's brilliant. There's also a D20 plus depth table that goes up to 34 of details. So elements that are added and modify the locations that you head to, and the same happens for encounters. And what that does is, the temptation, I think, as a game master when running this, is to pre-roll a load of different encounters. I think my advice to you is, if you're going to run this, don't do that, because actually part of the joy of running this is, as a game master, you get to see how this works as well. You're along for the ride. You get that surprise, and that's not something that we get very often as game masters, especially of game masters of fantasy role-playing games. Not story games. We have such a kind of huge control over the narrative that the temptation is to try and control all of this. But my advice, if you're going to run either of these, is go along for the ride with the players. Roll it. I'd read the whole thing first, so you know how to game master each of the sections. You have an idea of how each of the locations are going to work, and there's only a paragraph or two for each of them, and then let it actually emerge, and you will find that there are incredibly interesting things going on. this is the best mechanic that I've seen in years. But more importantly, one thing that Emmy Allen does is there's 3 depth tables, basically. There's one for locations, one for details for the locations, and then one for encounters. And what this does is it's just enough to be able to generate at the table. It's not so much that it's onerous. I was really worried the first time I ran this that, and I think I first heard about it on Questing Beast, his channel, or on maybe it was Fear of the Black Dragon, the old school RPG podcast. I was really concerned that it'd be too much to do at the table, and I'm going to be rolling like 3 tables and then like 3 charts, and then the players are going to be kind of getting distracted. It doesn't happen actually. If you ask the players to roll dice and then you just read out what it is, or you interpret what it is, it keeps everyone really, really invested. And especially when they get a result that they've had before and they know is frightening, is really, really, really fun. Or they get a result that they get a number that they've had before, but they can't quite remember what it is, but they know it might be frightening, is really, really good fun. The actual book itself, so it's printed on demand. I don't know if Emmy Allen ever had this kind of reprinted, like kind of offset printing or whatever they call it, but like a proper book. It's printed on demand. It's glue bound. It's great though. It's like £5 or I don't know what it is in dollars, but it's not that much. It has the best use of public domain art that I've ever seen. So obviously there's lots of it. And what I often find in old school modules or OSR modules or indie modules where they've got lots of public domain art is that it's not really curated that well, and people just kind of put anything in. The stuff here is curated really, really, really well. There's lots of Arthur Rackham illustrations. There's lots of, if it's drawing on Art Nouveau, if it's drawing on Edwardian pre-war, post-Victorian aesthetics, there's lots of illustrations that demonstrate that. It evokes a very particular feel when reading it. It is enjoyable to read. So that's the Gardens of Ynn. You should buy it. It's one of the best modules ever written for any game ever. It is an experience that every game master should have, is running the Gardens of Ynn, running a depth crawl. And then, so because it was successful, and I'm great at the Stygian Library, this is it's not a print-on-demand book. It's put together by, so it's kind of like properly put together. I don't know what technical terms are for that kind of like bookcraft, but there's lots and lots of space in the margins. Every single encounter, every single room is given specific, so it's given adequate space. There's nothing that bleeds onto separate pages, and things are bolded really, really nicely to make it really readable and really understandable. So what's going on in the Stygian Library? I actually think the initial hook for the Stygian Library is more convincing than the Gardens of Ynn. I always find it a little bit kind of awkward trying to get people into Ynn, but the ending is really, really, really good. The idea of thorns is fantastic. Whereas this is the reverse. I think that the ending is still good, but a little bit weaker than the beginning. So what the idea is that when there's too many books in one place, a great library, what happens is that amount of knowledge distorts space-time and may open a gateway to the Stygian Library, which is a generally unnoticed door in that room or in that library or scriptorium or whatever kind of place. The players find the door, they step through into the Stygian Library. Endless dark corridors of shelves, and there's these strange creatures that are kind of scuttling about, and you learn as they go through. Nothing is ever told in either of these modules, but you learn as you go through. The players will, that these things scuttling around are the librarians, and there's different orders of them based on what color they're wearing. There's other adventuring parties in there. There's lots of really strange, terrifying creatures in here. It is wonderful. I mean, let's just have a look at some of the locations, right? So you've got things as holding pens, help desks, right, where these strange librarian monk I don't know how to describe, like pale kind of little creatures exist. Infernal gateways at the bottom of the library, in the deepest depths of the library, to terrible kind of hellish planes. And what that means: jarred brains, ink vat, ossuaries, map galleries, mausolea, mummy vaults. There's all sorts of really cool, interesting things that are going on in this, with a really helpful description laid out for you that you can just kind of pluck out. Paper beehives. I mean, that's great. A D8 table. What changes it works upon them. For anyone who consumes a mouthful of like honey that has been made from the ink of these paper bees. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's really good fun. Now, at the centre of the Stygian Library is the Shale computer. I think that this ending is a little bit weaker than this, because I think really what people want at the end of the module is an antagonistic force, and the Shale computer isn't inherently antagonistic, and therefore it can be a little bit kind of anticlimactic. I think if you're going to use this, give them a reason to want to find the computer. So tell them that they need to, as part of a different, quest that they're doing, a different adventure that they're doing, that they need some kind of forgotten lore or impossible knowledge, and they will find it in the Stygian Library at the bottom. So they get to the computer, and it reminds me, I think it might even be listed as an inspiration, but it reminds me of the kind of like computing, like speaking machine in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, the Ankh-Morpork magic, the University of Magic. I can't quite remember its name, but the kind of clacking machine. It's really kind of steampunk. What I did, there is a kind of strange mechanic at the end for determining what the computer can say and what it can do, and how all the librarians are building towards it. What I did is, like I said, the one time I ran it, I gave the players a reason to want to get to the center of the library. I told them that the knowledge that they need is at the center, but didn't tell them exactly what it was. They got there, and basically I gave them the opportunity to ask a series of questions. I think I said 3, and the machine would answer the question 100% accurately, regardless of what the question was. So it would be equivalent of kind of casting a wish spell for scrying or knowledge. And what that did is it gave them information on their larger antagonist's movements and the antagonist's weaknesses and how they could beat him. That worked really, really, really well. So I think both of these are absolutely brilliant. The depth crawl mechanic is fantastic. It is something that I think is so revolutionary that I don't understand why other people aren't using it more. I think there is a module, it's Neverland, it's kind of inspired by Peter Pan, that might be like this, but I'm not sure. I've really wanted to write a depth crawl of a kind of dwarven hold, like walking through Moria. I think that would work really, really, really well. Anything where they've got to traverse a series of kind of slightly repetitive zones is brilliant for these. But this is amongst the most creative stuff I've ever read in terms of role-playing games. So you should absolutely check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Please like and subscribe to this if you find it interesting. But otherwise, thank you again for listening to my kind of ramblings. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you again soon. Thank you.